Have you ever been judged before people even knew who you were? Imagine walking up to a first-class line, ticket in hand, dressed in your best suit, confident and calm, only to be told you don't belong there. Now imagine being the CEO of a global company, worth millions, and still being treated like a fraud. This isn't just a story about a seat on a plane. It's a story about respect, power, and what happens when dignity meets arrogance in Medea. Welcome back to Swift Tale, the channel where every story is more than just drama. It's a lesson about life, justice, and humanity. If you're visiting for the first time, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because the story you're about to hear will stay with you long after the video ends. And I've got a question for you. What would you do if someone denied your worth right to your face, when you knew the truth could shatter their entire world? Today's story is about a man who didn't just face discrimination, he turned it into a moment that made history. A black CEO, calm, composed, and brilliant, arrives at an airport to board his flight. He has a meeting scheduled overseas that could seal a multi-million-dollar partnership. He holds a first-class ticket reserved under his name, but when he approaches the gate, something unexpected happens. The flight attendant looks at him, then at the ticket, and says, "Sir, I think you're in the wrong line." What follows next will expose not only prejudice, but also how quickly power dynamics can flip when truth and influence collide. This story matters because it's not just about race or class, it's about perception. It's about the moments when people underestimate others because of how they look, speak, or carry themselves. It's about dignity, the quiet kind that doesn't need to shout or demand attention, but speaks louder than any title ever could. In a world where social media thrives on outrage, this man's response wasn't to yell, fight, or make a scene. He simply waited and made one phone call that changed everything. 14 minutes later, the entire airline that humiliated him was grounded. Every plane, every flight, every operation stopped cold. Why? Because this man wasn't just another passenger. He was the force behind the very system that kept that airline in the air. And when the truth came out, it shook not just an industry, but millions who saw what quiet power really looks like. By the end of this video, you'll see how one act of prejudice became the trigger for an unforgettable act of justice. You'll see how control, patience, and class can sometimes be the most powerful weapons of all. And most importantly, you'll walk away reminded of a simple truth: never underestimate the person standing quietly before you. So grab your seat, because this is not just another viral story, it's a tale of strength, humility, and poetic justice. And before we dive in, tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated or looked down upon just because of how you appeared? Let's talk about it. Because today's story isn't only about one man, it's about all of us who have ever been told, "You don't belong here." Now let's begin. Before we dive into the chaos that unfolded at the airport, let's step back for a moment and truly understand the man at the center of this story, the man they dared to underestimate. His name is Michael A. Lawson, though most people in the business world call him Mr. Lawson. To the public, he's known as the visionary CEO of Aerotech Global, one of the largest technology firms providing aviation software and logistics systems to airlines around the world. But to those who know him personally, he's the man who came from nothing, a man whose journey is built on hard work, sacrifice, and unshakable belief in himself. Michael grew up on the south side of Chicago in a one-bedroom apartment that he shared with his mother and younger sister. His father left when he was 7, and life taught him early that the world doesn't hand out fairness, you have to carve it out for yourself. His mother, a school teacher, often told him, "Son, never let the world tell you who you are, you tell the world." That sentence became the compass of his life. He wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't gifted with privilege. Everything he became was a result of persistence and sleepless nights. After earning a scholarship to Harvard, Michael worked 2 part-time jobs, one in the library and another cleaning offices, just to make ends meet. There were nights he studied under flickering fluorescent lights, too exhausted to eat, but too determined to quit. When he graduated, he didn't chase fame or luxury. He chased excellence. Over the next 2 decades, Michael climbed through the ranks of the corporate world with precision and intelligence that caught everyone's attention. From data analysis to corporate strategy, his fingerprints were on some of the biggest aviation innovations of the decade. Eventually, he built his own company, Aerotech, which revolutionized the software that keeps airplanes in the sky. His technology-powered navigation systems, security protocols, and flight coordination tools used by airlines across the globe. But even as his empire grew, Michael remained humble. He wasn't the kind of CEO who hid behind tinted glass offices or private jets. He believed in walking through his company's halls, talking to his engineers, sharing lunch with his interns. His leadership style wasn't built on fear, it was built on respect. That's why his employees adored him and his competitors envied him. However, behind that calm and calculated demeanor was a man who had faced prejudice his entire life in boardrooms, business dinners, and media headlines. He was used to being doubted, questioned, and tested. He had learned to respond not with anger, but with success. His silence was never weakness, it was focus. And that brings us to the day that changed everything. The day his patience was tested in the most humiliating way possible. Michael was scheduled to attend an international conference in Zurich, a meeting that could finalize a deal worth over $500 million. The success of this contract would expand his company into new territories, bringing jobs and innovation to multiple countries. He planned the trip carefully, choosing to fly on one of the very airlines that used his company's software, a quiet reminder of how interconnected his work had become with global aviation. He woke up early that morning, well-rested and composed. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he looked every bit the global executive. His assistant handed him his ticket, first class, flight 217, gate B12. Everything was in order. As he drove to the airport, he reflected on how far he'd come. Just a few decades ago, he couldn't even afford a bus ticket to visit his college friends across town. Now, he was boarding international flights, leading a company that shaped the future of travel itself. But what he didn't know was that this very flight, this seemingly ordinary business trip, would become a turning point not only in his life, but in how the world viewed discrimination and corporate accountability. To the world, he was a symbol of progress, a man who represented what happens when talent and integrity meet opportunity. But to a few narrow-minded individuals at the airport, he was just another face in the crowd, someone who didn't look like a first-class passenger. It's ironic, isn't it? The very system that ran because of his technology was about to insult the man who built it. Michael arrived at the airport with his usual calm confidence. He smiled at the security officers, greeted the staff politely, and moved with quiet purpose. His assistant had already checked him in online, so all he needed to do was walk to the gate. But life has a way of testing the people who least expect it, and in a few moments, he would find himself face to face with a situation that would reveal just how far society still has to go. He wasn't angry yet. He wasn't even aware of what was coming. But in that moment, as he adjusted his tie and glanced at his watch, there was something unshakable in his spirit, the kind of calm that comes from knowing your worth, even when the world refuses to see it. Because when you've built yourself from the ground up, no insult can break you, it can only expose those who throw it. As Michael Lawson stepped toward gate B12, unaware of the humiliation waiting for him, fate prepared to write one of the most poetic chapters in his life. The terminal was alive with the usual buzz, rolling suitcases, chatter, the faint aroma of coffee drifting from a nearby cafe. Business travelers tapped on laptops, families juggled children and boarding passes, and the voice over the intercom announced upcoming flights in calm, robotic tones. Everything looked ordinary until the moment was. Michael Lawson walked toward gate B12, his boarding pass neatly tucked into a leather wallet. The morning sunlight filtered through the massive airport windows, reflecting off his cufflinks. He looked every bit the image of composure, calm, professional, confident. People glanced at him with the same curiosity they gave any well-dressed traveler, though none knew they were standing next to the man whose company powered half the airport's operations. He approached the counter and smiled politely at the attendant, a woman in her early 30s wearing the airline's navy blue uniform. "Good morning," Michael greeted, offering his passport and ticket. She barely glanced up at first, tapping on her keyboard, her tone clipped and routine. "Morning, destination Zurich." "Yes, that's right," he replied. Her eyes flicked to the screen, then to him. She frowned. Sir, this line is for first-class passengers. Michael blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Yes, he said, keeping his voice calm, that's what this ticket is for. She tilted her head slightly, her smile polite but strained, the kind of smile that hides doubt. Are you sure? Maybe you mean business class, economy. Michael's brows furrowed slightly. No, he said, still patient. First class. He handed her the boarding pass again, his name, Mr. Michael A. Lawson, printed clearly next to the bold first-class label. The attendant hesitated, glancing over her shoulder at a colleague before scanning the ticket again. A moment of silence passed, the kind that feels heavier than it should. Her colleague leaned closer, whispering something that made her lips tighten. Then she looked back at Michael and said, Sir, I'm sorry, but this ticket seems incorrect. You'll need to step aside while we check with a supervisor. Passengers behind him began to murmur. Some sighed impatiently, others looked curious. Michael could feel the shift, that invisible, uncomfortable energy that comes when a person of color is singled out in a public space. Still, he didn't react. He simply nodded. Of course, he said, stepping aside. He stood quietly as the line continued to move. A few minutes later, a man in a blazer with a supervisor badge approached, holding a tablet. What seems to be the issue? He asked. The attendant pointed discreetly at Michael. His ticket says first class, but... But what? Michael interjected softly, not angry but firm. It says first class because that's what I paid for. The supervisor smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't friendly, it was condescending. I understand, sir, but we just need to verify. Sometimes passengers book through third-party sites and there can be confusion. Michael exhaled through his nose. There's no confusion, he said evenly. I booked directly through your corporate concierge team. You can check the reservation code. The supervisor glanced at the tablet, typing rapidly. His expression froze for a brief moment. The screen confirmed everything Michael said. Yet instead of apologizing, the man said, Well, unfortunately, first class is fully boarded now. We can offer you a seat in business class instead, at no extra charge. Michael stared at him, silent. Around him, passengers kept moving, a blur of voices, footsteps, and indifference. But in that moment, the air felt still. He could have raised his voice. He could have demanded justice right then. But years of navigating corporate rooms where he'd been underestimated had taught him something valuable. The loudest person rarely holds the most power. He gave a small nod, more to himself than to anyone else. I see, he said quietly, so you're saying my seat, my paid seat, was given away. The supervisor hesitated. It appears so, sir, but we'll make sure you're comfortable in business class. Michael smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Comfortable, he repeated, almost as if testing the word. A nearby passenger, an older man in a tailored grey suit, leaned toward the supervisor. Excuse me, he said loudly, this gentleman was clearly here before me. If his seat is in first class, give it to him. The supervisor stiffened. Sir, please. But the man shook his head. I've been watching. He's handled this better than I would have. This isn't right. Michael turned to the man and nodded respectfully. I appreciate that, sir, he said, but it's all right. Because deep down, it wasn't all right, but it would be. The supervisor motioned for Michael to wait as boarding continued. Every now and then, someone in line glanced his way, a few sympathetic, others judgmental. Someone whispered, probably overbooked. Happens all the time. Another muttered, he doesn't look like he flies first class anyway. The words didn't sting as much as they used to. He'd heard worse. But as he stood there, his phone buzzed. His assistant's name appeared on the screen, Rachel, Corporate Ops. He ignored it for now. When the final group was called, the supervisor approached once more. Sir, we can seat you in business class, row 8A. I'll make sure you receive a complimentary meal upgrade. Michael looked at him for a long second, then simply nodded. Very well. He handed over his ticket, accepted the replacement boarding pass, and walked toward the gate. Every step was quiet, deliberate, but inside, a storm was forming. He paused for a brief moment before entering the jet bridge. He turned slightly, catching the attendant's eye. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. "Thank you for your help. I'll remember this experience very clearly." The attendant blinked, uncertain if it was a threat or a statement. But by the time she processed it, Michael was gone, boarding pass in hand, walking down the narrow tunnel toward a plane that was about to become the center of global attention. At that moment, he didn't know that every decision, every moment of restraint, and every quiet second of humiliation would soon echo across the entire aviation industry. Because in less than an hour, and exactly 14 minutes after takeoff, Michael Lawson would remind the world that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It simply acts. The hum of the jet bridge surrounded Michael as he stepped onto the plane. The air was cooler, scented faintly with recycled air and new leather. Flight attendants greeted passengers with polite smiles that barely reached their eyes, the kind you give after saying the same words 100 times in a day. "Welcome aboard," said one attendant automatically as Michael handed her his boarding pass. She scanned it, frowned slightly, then glanced at the first-class cabin just ahead. "Sir," she said softly, "this isn't the way to business class. That's to your left." Michael stopped, his expression neutral. "Yes," he said, "I know, but I was assigned a first-class seat originally. There seems to have been a mistake." The attendant's voice took on that sharp, rehearsed edge, polite, but dismissive. "I understand, sir, but I'll need you to step aside while we verify." Passengers behind him began to queue up impatiently. Someone muttered, "Come on, just move." The line shifted, and Michael felt that familiar heat rise in his chest, not anger, but the heavy weight of recognition. He'd been here before, not literally, but emotionally, standing in spaces where his presence was questioned before his worth was known. "Of course," he said quietly, stepping to the side. The attendant whispered something to her colleague. Both looked over at him, their expressions a mix of suspicion and discomfort. Michael stood still, his leather briefcase at his side, posture straight, eyes forward, every second stretched. A mother ushered her child past him, avoiding eye contact. A businessman glanced at him, then quickly looked away. "Sir," the first attendant said finally, "there's been some confusion. Your ticket appears to be marked incorrectly. You'll need to take a seat in business class for this flight." Michael's tone stayed steady. "I understand, but I paid for first class. The ticket was issued correctly." Her smile didn't falter. "Sir, please, I don't want to make a scene." The words struck harder than she probably intended. "I don't want to make a scene," as if he was the one disrupting the calm, as if his quiet insistence was trouble. Michael took a slow breath. "Neither do I," he said softly, "but I think this situation already is one." The captain, passing through the cabin, glanced at the small crowd forming. He paused, brow furrowed. "What's going on here?" he asked. The attendant gestured lightly. "Just a minor mix-up, Captain. We're sorting it out." The captain nodded curtly. "Let's keep things moving," he said before disappearing back into the cockpit. Michael handed over his boarding pass once more. The attendant didn't even look at the seat number this time. She simply printed a new one. "Here you go," she said, her voice lower now. "Seat 8A, we'll make sure you're comfortable." He accepted the ticket without another word. As he turned toward the business class cabin, he noticed the first-class passengers settling in crystal glasses, white tablecloths, murmured conversations about mergers and markets. A few glanced at him, curious. He could read their faces easily. Who's he? Did he try to sneak up here? He said nothing. As he took his seat, a young flight attendant, perhaps new, perhaps nervous, approached him timidly. "Can I get you something to drink, sir?" she asked, clearly sensing his frustration. "Water's fine," he said. Then after a pause he added, "Thank you." She smiled faintly, grateful for his kindness. He leaned back, the leather creaking softly under his weight, and stared out the window. The runway stretched endlessly before him, a symbol of forward motion, freedom, and power. But right now, it felt like a cage. His phone buzzed. It was his assistant, Rachel. He opened the message. "Everything on track for Zurich. Don't forget the 3 p.m. briefing with the investors. He typed back slowly. Minor delay, will update soon. He put the phone down and folded his hands in his lap. Around him, passengers chatted and laughed, oblivious to what had just unfolded. The humiliation wasn't in being moved to another seat, it was in being treated as though his money, his status, his presence didn't carry the same weight. The irony didn't escape him. The very airline that had just downgraded him was one of his company's largest clients. They used his software, his systems, to keep their planes flying safely every day. Without Aerotech's integrated control programs, this airline's entire global network could face operational chaos within hours. He thought about that for a long moment. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth lifted in the faintest, most controlled smile. Not out of vengeance, not even satisfaction, but because he knew knowledge was power and patience was the key to wielding it. A man across the aisle who had been watching quietly leaned toward him. "That wasn't right," he said in a low voice. "I saw what they did." Michael met his gaze. "It's fine," he replied calmly. "People reveal themselves when they think no one important is watching." The man frowned. "But you are important." Michael gave a small nod. "They'll realize that soon enough." He turned his attention back to the window. Outside, the airport crew moved busily, loading luggage, refueling, checking hydraulics. The plane's engines began to hum. The world carried on, unaware that one quiet passenger in seat 8A held more influence than everyone on that aircraft combined. Before takeoff, the head attendant made an announcement apologizing for a brief delay due to minor scheduling adjustments. Michael chuckled softly. Life had an odd sense of humor. The same people who denied him respect were about to rely on the technology he created to get them safely into the sky. He took out his tablet, opened an email draft, and began typing. His fingers moved with precision. It wasn't anger that guided them, it was control. The kind of control that comes from power earned, not demanded. When he finished, he reread the first line. "Rachel, initiate protocol review for Flight 217. Aerosync integration check required immediately." It was a simple, professional message on the surface, but to anyone who worked inside Aerotech, those words meant something else entirely. He hit send. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the crew prepared for takeoff. Michael closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered to himself, "Let's see who really doesn't belong here." And as the engines roared to life, not one person on that plane, not the attendants, not the captain, not the executive sipping champagne up front, could have guessed that in just 14 minutes, everything they knew was about to come crashing down. The plane taxied down the runway, sunlight glinting off its wings as engines rumbled softly beneath the cabin floor. Passengers settled in, some adjusting their seats, others already diving into emails or movies. The soft chime of seatbelt signs echoed overhead. From the outside, everything looked like a normal flight, but for one man in seat 8A, nothing about this moment was ordinary. Michael Lawson sat quietly, eyes closed, his fingers interlaced on his lap. To anyone watching, he seemed calm, perhaps even bored, but beneath that stillness was calculation. His mind wasn't on Zurich anymore. It wasn't on the deal waiting across the Atlantic. It was on what had just happened and what that moment truly represented. He'd faced discrimination before. He'd been dismissed, doubted, talked over in meetings, and underestimated by people who couldn't see past his skin. But this time was different. This wasn't just a personal insult. This was systemic arrogance, carried out by a corporation that, ironically, depended on his technology to survive. He opened his tablet, reviewing his earlier message to Rachel. The protocol review he'd requested wasn't a random check. It was a signal, one that only a handful of Aerotech executives would recognize. Within minutes, that message would reach Aerotech's Network Operations Center, triggering an internal systems diagnostic across all airlines that used their software, including this one. To the airline, it would look like a scheduled compliance review, but to Michael and his team, it was a quiet test of control. He wasn't trying to sabotage anyone, not yet. He was simply reminding himself of something crucial. Power doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it's a whisper sent through code. A flight attendant approached, smiling professionally. "Would you like a drink before we take off, sir?" He looked up, his face unreadable. "No, thank you." "Would you like a blanket or pillow?" "No, I'm fine." She hesitated, sensing something beneath his politeness, a weight in his tone. She nodded and moved on. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been cleared for takeoff. Please remain seated and enjoy your flight." The engines roared. The plane began its slow, powerful roll forward. Michael's hand rested on his briefcase. Inside it, a folder of documents detailing his company's contractual ties with this airline. A single clause in that contract gave Aerotech the right to suspend all software services in the event of a breach of partnership ethics. It was a safeguard, one rarely invoked, but entirely within his legal reach. As the plane accelerated, Michael gazed out the window, his reflection merging with the rising blue sky. He thought about his mother's words from years ago, "Never fight to prove you belong, just show them." The wheels lifted from the runway, the cabin tilted upward. Passengers leaned back in their seats as gravity pressed them down. The familiar sound of ascent filled the air. For a brief moment, Michael allowed himself to breathe deeply. Then, just minutes later, the captain's voice returned, this time less calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue. We'll be returning to the gate shortly. Please remain seated." A ripple of confusion spread through the cabin. Heads turned, murmurs rose, a businessman muttered, "What kind of issue?" A mother clutched her child's hand. Michael didn't move, he knew. The plane slowed, banking gently as it made its way back toward the terminal. Outside, through the small oval window, he could see the runway lights passing beneath them. The engines powered down, replaced by a strange, almost eerie silence. As the aircraft rolled to a stop, the intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unexpected systems alert, we'll need to have maintenance conduct a brief inspection before takeoff. We apologize for the inconvenience." The attendants moved down the aisles, their smiles tighter now. Passengers groaned, phones lit up. One man complained loudly that he'd miss his connecting flight. Another joked, "Guess someone forgot to plug something in." Michael said nothing. He simply glanced at the time on his watch. Exactly 14 minutes since he'd sent the message. He opened his tablet again, discreetly refreshing a secure portal. A line of data streamed across the screen. Aerotech Systems status, airline network, under review. ETA to restore full operational access, pending CEO clearance. He closed the tablet and leaned back. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about ego. It was about principle. Respect isn't just earned, it's reciprocal, and today someone had forgotten that. The captain stepped out of the cockpit, whispering urgently to the head flight attendant. Their expressions shifted from confusion to concern. Michael caught fragments of their words. Software lockout, communication freeze, flight control access suspended. He almost felt sorry for them, almost. Passengers were asked to deboard temporarily while the technical issue was investigated. The crowd groaned again, dragging bags from overhead compartments. Michael waited until most had left before standing up. As he moved toward the exit, the same attendant who had earlier doubted him stood by the door. Her face was pale now, worry replacing arrogance. "Sorry for the delay, sir," she said quietly, eyes lowered. "It's been one of those mornings." Michael met her gaze, not cruelly, but with calm authority. "Yes," he said, "it has been one of those mornings." Then he stepped off the plane. Inside the terminal, airport staff scurried about, phones ringing, radios crackling. Something big was happening. Systems across the airline's fleet were failing to sync, flights delayed, gates frozen. Confusion spreading like wildfire. And all it took was one message. Michael walked to a quiet corner of the terminal, opened his phone, and dialed. "Rachel," he said when she answered, his voice even. Yes, sir, we've received confirmation. The diagnostic triggered across all airline systems. They're offline for safety checks. Good, he replied. Hold all restores until I say otherwise. There was a pause. Then Rachel asked softly, do you want me to alert their executives? Michael smiled faintly. No, let them call me. He hung up, slipped his phone into his jacket pocket, and looked through the massive glass window at the plane still sitting idle on the tarmac. 14 minutes ago, they told him he didn't belong in first class. Now, the entire airline couldn't take off without him. The name Aerotech echoed in the room like thunder. Everyone knew that name. It was the backbone of their entire operation, the network provider that managed everything from flight scheduling to in-air communication. Without it, the airline was paralyzed. Get Aerotech on the line, the executive barked. Find out what the hell going on. Phones rang, emails flew, but no one had a direct answer, not yet. Meanwhile, on Michael's phone, a single text appeared from Rachel. Sir, the airline's CEO just called. They're requesting an emergency meeting. He smiled slightly, right on time. He typed back, tell them I'm currently at gate 14, waiting for my flight that never took off. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and glanced around. The same flight attendant who had questioned his first-class ticket earlier was now packing near the counter, trying to calm frustrated passengers. Her confidence was gone, replaced with confusion and regret. A businessman nearby muttered, unbelievable, they can't even get a single flight in the air. What kind of airline is this? Another replied, heard it's a system failure, something about the tech network freezing. Michael said nothing. He just checked the time, 14 minutes since the plane's first attempt to take off. Inside the airline's headquarters, hundreds of miles away, panic deepened. Servers blinked red, flight tracking maps froze midair, and emergency teams scrambled to contact Aerotech's executives. Then, someone finally connected the dots. Sir, an analyst said breathlessly to the airline CEO, the system lockout was authorized internally by Aerotech's CEO himself. The CEO frowned. Michael Lawson. Yes, sir. The name sank in like a weight. Every executive in the room knew who that was, the man whose technology ran their company, the man who'd personally signed the software licensing deal, the man they couldn't afford to anger. Get him on the phone, now. Back at the airport, Michael's phone buzzed again. Unknown number, he answered. Mr. Lawson, the voice on the other end was tense, polite, and nervous. This is Richard Evans, Chief Operations Officer at Skylux Airlines. We're experiencing a network malfunction that seems to have originated from your company's systems. We'd like to. Michael interrupted softly, his tone calm but cold. Richard, it's not a malfunction, it's a review. A review? Yes, a compliance review triggered when a client breaches the ethics clause in our partnership contract. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, I think you are, Michael said evenly. 14 minutes ago, one of your employees at gate 12 told me I didn't belong in first class. I was removed from my seat despite having a confirmed ticket. When I corrected her, I was spoken to like I was lying. When I identified myself, I was ignored. The line went silent. Michael could almost hear the executive's heartbeat through the phone. Mr. Lawson, I assure you this must be a misunderstanding. Michael cut him off again. Your company signed an agreement stating that discriminatory or unethical behavior by your staff, if unaddressed, would trigger a system-wide review. It's all in your contract, Richard. I don't activate these often, but today I made an exception. Please, Richard said, desperation creeping into his voice. Our flights, our passengers, they're all stuck on the ground. Can we at least restore partial access while we resolve this? Michael's response was measured, deliberate. No, not until your airline issues a formal apology to every passenger who was affected, and not until you personally call me back, not as a COO, but as a man who understands accountability. Richard swallowed hard. Yes, sir, I understand. Michael hung up. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, but he didn't care. Around him, the airport buzzed with restless energy, people complaining, staff apologizing, pilots waiting for updates. But amidst the noise, one truth stood quietly tall. Sometimes the most powerful retaliation isn't chaos, it's silence that forces the world to listen. Minutes later, his phone buzzed again. A new message from Rachel. Global aviation news picking up reports. Headline: Technical outage grounds Skylux fleet worldwide. He smirked faintly. The story was already spreading, but not because of him, because actions speak for themselves. He took a deep breath and looked out the massive glass window, watching as grounded planes sat motionless under the afternoon sun, symbols of a lesson being written in real time. And for the first time in years, he felt at peace, not because he'd won, but because he'd reminded the world what quiet dignity looks like when pushed too far. 14 minutes of arrogance. 14 minutes of silence. 14 minutes that changed everything. The airline's headquarters resembled a war room. Screens lined the walls, flashing grounded flights, delayed schedules, and passengers stranded across multiple countries. Phones rang endlessly. Emails piled into overflowing inboxes. Executive assistants darted across the floor, clutching tablets and printed memos like lifelines. Skylux Airlines, a company that had prided itself on efficiency, suddenly appeared powerless. And at the center of it all was Michael Lawson, though most of the airline staff had no idea who had triggered the chaos. All they knew was that their planes weren't moving, and every system they relied on was offline. "Find out what happened," the airline CEO shouted across the room, voice tight with panic. "Who did this? Who has control of Aerotech?" An analyst hesitated. "Sir, it appears this action was authorized at the executive level. The CEO of Aerotech himself, Michael Lawson, implemented the review protocol, and all of our flights are grounded until further notice." The words hung in the air like thunder. Every executive in the room understood the implication. They had underestimated him, and now the consequences were impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, outside, passengers had already begun sharing videos on social media. Smartphones captured frustrated travelers, cancelled flight announcements, and confused gate agents. Within minutes, hashtags began trending: grounded by justice, CEO shutdown, and Skylux chaos. News outlets picked up the story instantly. Headlines screamed: Black CEO grounds entire airline after first-class dispute. Viral video shows executive denied seat. 14 minutes later, airline paralyzed. Journalists called the airline offices repeatedly. Executives ducked into private rooms, muttering apologies and excuses. PR teams scrambled to craft statements that wouldn't make the company look worse, but nothing could contain the damage. The footage circulating online was clear: a confident, composed black CEO treated like he didn't belong, and an entire airline brought to a halt as a result. Inside the operations center, engineers worked feverishly to restore systems, but every attempt triggered automated failsafes. Michael had designed the protocol to ensure compliance checks could not be bypassed, a safeguard that had saved countless airlines from catastrophic mistakes in the past. Now, ironically, it was saving his dignity while exposing the airline's failures. Executives huddled in groups, whispers spreading faster than their own flight schedules. "Did you see this? He's the reason we're grounded. Can we apologize fast enough? Is he going to sue?" Michael, meanwhile, stood quietly in the airport lounge, observing the unfolding chaos with a calm he had cultivated over decades. To a casual observer, he was just another traveler, waiting for his delayed flight. But to those who understood the situation, he was a master of timing, patience, and strategy. News crews began calling him directly, asking for interviews. He declined politely, knowing that the story itself would speak louder than any words he could give. The humiliation he had suffered at the gate now served as a silent teaching moment for thousands, maybe millions, around the globe. Passengers began to notice the airline staff's sudden nervousness. Flight attendants, previously dismissive, now approached travelers with exaggerated courtesy, offering snacks, blankets, and apologies that sounded rehearsed but carried genuine unease. Gate agents whispered urgently into headsets, and even the captain of the flight Michael had boarded looked unusually concerned, checking systems repeatedly. Corporate lawyers drafted emergency statements, attempting to frame the incident as a technical review and a routine systems check, but the world didn't buy it. Social media had already turned the story into a lesson about respect, accountability, and the dangers of underestimating someone based on appearance. Executives tried to call Michael directly, leaving messages filled with desperation. "Sir, we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding. Please let us know how we can rectify this immediately. Mr. Lawson, this situation is unprecedented. We hope you'll consider restoring operations without further delay." Michael read each message with quiet satisfaction. There was no anger in his expression, only the knowledge that justice had been served, elegantly and without spectacle. He could have demanded fines, public shamming, or retaliation, but he chose restraint, proving that true power doesn't need to shout. As hours passed, the airline began issuing official apologies on social media. Statements flooded in. "We apologize for the incident involving Mr. Michael Lawson at Gate B12. This behavior does not reflect our company's values. We are implementing immediate corrective measures." News anchors dissected the story. Analysts debated how one man's patience, dignity, and understanding of corporate systems could bring an entire airline to its knees in just 14 minutes. Opinion pieces praised Michael as a symbol of calm authority and integrity, while the airline scrambled to salvage both operations and reputation. Michael, still seated in the airport lounge, finally allowed himself to lean back. A notification appeared on his tablet, trending worldwide. News outlets from New York to Zurich to Tokyo were reporting the story. His quiet action, his refusal to respond with anger, had become a global lesson. And in that moment, he realized something profound. Sometimes, the most powerful message isn't in shouting your worth. It's in letting the world witness the consequences of ignoring it. The humiliation he had faced at the gate had been replaced by respect, not forced, not demanded, but earned. And all it took was patience, intelligence, and the courage to act when it mattered most. The world had taken notice. From social media feeds to morning news broadcasts, headlines screamed across platforms. Black CEO grounds entire airline after first-class dispute. One man, one message, 14 minutes that shook Skylux. CEO stands up to discrimination, quietly and effectively. But Michael Lawson didn't rush to comment. He understood something most people forget. In moments of outrage, restraint can be louder than anger. Instead of firing off a statement, he waited. He observed, letting the world see the consequences unfold. And then, when the timing was perfect, he spoke. A press conference was scheduled at a neutral location, a conference room filled with journalists, cameras, and microphones. Michael entered quietly, exuding the same calm confidence he had displayed all morning. The room hushed as he approached the podium. No dramatic gestures, no shouting, just presence, authority, and quiet dignity. "Good afternoon," he began, voice steady, composed, and clear. "Earlier today, I was denied a seat I had purchased in first class. That experience, while unpleasant, was not about me. It was about accountability. It was about respect." He paused, letting the words sink in. Every eye in the room was on him. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, cameras flashed, and even the airline's representatives in the back leaned forward, tense. "When we are judged by appearances," he continued, "when our worth is questioned because of who we are or what we look like, it's not just personal, it's systemic, and it's something we all must confront. I chose to act, not out of anger, but because principles matter." A reporter raised a hand. "Mr. Lawson, are you saying the airline's actions were discriminatory?" He nodded calmly. "Yes, and while individual employees may have acted unconsciously, the responsibility lies with the organization to ensure respect and fairness. Today, we reminded them, and the world, that accountability has consequences. Another journalist asked, "Why not just take a business class seat and move on?" Michael smiled faintly, because dignity isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about ensuring that respect is never optional. If we ignore injustice, even small moments of it, we perpetuate a system that allows them to continue. The cameras zoomed in, capturing his composure. Social media clips of his words were immediately shared, snippets of calm authority that contrasted sharply with the chaos he had caused at the airline. Within minutes, the hashtag #CEO with dignity began trending worldwide. Michael concluded with a simple yet profound message. "I don't seek revenge, I seek fairness. I don't demand attention, I demonstrate accountability. And I hope that today serves as a reminder, respect is not given lightly, it must be practiced consistently." He stepped down from the podium. No one clapped immediately. The room was stunned, silent in recognition of the power of restraint. But then, a ripple of admiration spread. Reporters exchanged looks. Even airline executives, once desperate and panicked, understood that their arrogance had been exposed and their lesson delivered in the most elegant way possible. Outside the conference room, social media exploded. Millions watched, shared, and commented. Influencers praised his calm authority. Thought leaders analyzed his strategy. Ordinary people shared stories of times they'd been underestimated, drawing inspiration from his example. In boardrooms, classrooms, and living rooms, one lesson resonated globally. True power doesn't scream, it acts, it waits. And when necessary, it reminds the world of what justice looks like, silently, firmly, and with dignity. Michael didn't need to follow the viral trend. The story followed him. And for once, the world collectively paused to see someone turn an act of humiliation into a demonstration of influence that transcended money, status, and race. By the end of the day, the airline issued a formal, public apology, acknowledging the incident and committing to employee training, policy changes, and accountability measures. The CEO personally called Michael to apologize, a conversation that, while brief, symbolized a shift in understanding. Respect cannot be optional, and dignity cannot be ignored. And so Michael Lawson, the man denied a seat just hours earlier, became more than a CEO. He became a symbol of calm authority, strategic patience, and moral clarity, a reminder that sometimes the quietest actions leave the loudest impact. By the next morning, the story had become more than just a viral headline. It was a case study in accountability, corporate ethics, and the quiet power of dignity. Michael Lawson's actions had forced an entire airline, one of the largest in the world, to confront systemic flaws they had long ignored. Employees, executives, and passengers alike were left re-examining how respect and fairness are truly applied in everyday interactions. Within Skylux Airlines, policies were rewritten almost immediately. Staff underwent intensive training on customer service, diversity, and equity, ensuring that no passenger would ever be dismissed or humiliated in the way Michael had been. Systems were updated not only for operational efficiency, but also to flag potential incidents of discrimination or disrespect. Every employee was reminded that technology could enforce standards, but human judgment was what created the culture. Across the aviation industry, competitors began taking notes. News reports highlighted how a single individual's ethical stance could have tangible consequences on global operations. CEOs, board members, and corporate managers held internal meetings to assess their own practices, asking uncomfortable questions. Are we truly respecting all customers? Are we allowing unconscious bias to affect decisions? Are we prepared for accountability when someone challenges our negligence? For passengers around the world, the story became more personal. Many shared their own experiences of discrimination, unequal treatment, or subtle biases, sparking conversations about social equity beyond the airline industry. Michael's calm, dignified response served as a blueprint, showing that one doesn't need anger, public confrontation, or aggression to make a lasting impact. Quiet, strategic action could be infinitely more powerful. Business schools quickly incorporated the incident into ethics and leadership courses. Case studies analyzed Michael's approach. the restraint he maintained under personal humiliation, the intelligent, lawful use of his company's systems to enforce accountability, the public statement he delivered, which transformed personal grievance into a broader lesson about respect and ethics. Executives began to see the story as a cautionary tale. One airline CEO admitted in a Forbes interview, "We underestimated what dignity, intelligence, and strategic patience could do. We were humbled publicly. Michael Lawson didn't just ground our planes, he grounded our complacency." Even within Michael's own company, the event became a teaching moment. Employees understood that leadership isn't just about profits or operational success. It's about principles. It's about taking action when injustice occurs, even in small or seemingly trivial ways, because those moments define character and influence reputation. Outside of corporate circles, the public embraced the story as a moral lesson. Social media users, commentators, and thought leaders highlighted the importance of patience, composure, and action rooted in principle. Michael became a figure representing integrity and quiet power, proof that one can turn personal affronts into societal lessons. And perhaps most importantly, the story reminded people everywhere that accountability doesn't have to be loud to be effective. Systems may fail, egos may clash, and people may act without thought. But when courage, ethics, and strategy align, even a single individual can create ripples that resonate far beyond themselves. Michael Lawson returned to his routine shortly after the incident: flights, meetings, and business expansion. But the world had changed. Airlines were more cautious, executives more aware, and passengers more empowered. All because one man refused to accept humiliation, chose action over anger, and demonstrated that dignity, patience, and principle are forces to be reckoned with. The story wasn't just about a first-class seat. It was about respect, ethics, and the quiet power of integrity. And the lessons it taught would continue to echo across boardrooms, airports, and homes for years to come. And so, the story of Michael Lawson comes full circle. From a single moment of humiliation at the gate to a worldwide lesson in dignity, ethics, and accountability, his actions remind us that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through restraint, strategy, and principle. What began as a personal injustice ended as a global reminder that respect is non-negotiable, and that integrity combined with intelligence can change the course of events in ways few ever anticipate. This isn't just a story about a first-class seat or an airline's temporary chaos. It's a story about standing up for yourself calmly, thoughtfully, and effectively. It's about understanding that true leadership comes not from ego or anger, but from patience, composure, and knowing when and how to act. Michael's example teaches us that even in the face of disregard or discrimination, we can create change that resonates far beyond our immediate circumstances. For all of you watching, there's a lesson here that goes beyond the airport or corporate boardroom. Every time we encounter unfairness, whether in our careers, communities, or daily lives, how we respond matters. It's not just about speaking up, it's about how we choose to speak, when we choose to act, and how our actions reflect the principles we hold dear. If this story inspired you, amazed you, or made you think differently about respect and accountability, I want to hear from you. Comment below, share your thoughts, your reactions, or a time when you faced a similar situation and how you handled it. Stories like Michael's are powerful because they remind us that anyone can make a difference, no matter the scale. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into a real-life lesson of patience, power, and principle, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Swift Tale. If this is your first time here, welcome. We bring you stories that inspire, challenge, and sometimes shock, all while uncovering the lessons behind the headlines. Finally, remember this: respect is earned, dignity is maintained, and true influence comes quietly, but its impact can be seismic. Let Michael Lawson's story serve as a reminder that every action, even the calmest, can ripple far beyond what we imagine. Thank you for watching Swift Tale, and I'll see you in the next story, where we uncover the extraordinary lessons hidden inside the ordinary moments of life.